Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with Season 9, Episode 10 of our weekly Q&A video/podcast. If you're on YouTube, links in the description for the podcast. And if you're on the podcast app only, you're not allowed to watch us on YouTube anymore. I want you to go to our account. I want you to find our channel. I want you to unsubscribe.
Oh my gosh.
But then you do have to donate to us on Patreon. So if you're on the podcast right now, you have to give us actual real money. But you're not allowed to watch our YouTube videos anymore. Just...
yeah, right.
Make sure that we're clear. Yeah, okay. I don't make the rules. I just
you just communicate them. Don't shoot the messenger. Is that what you're saying?
I don't make the rules. I just reach into the place deep in my head where
stuff happens,
where the elder gods communicate through me, and
right,
and yeah. Anyways, getting into the first question this week, Cameron 107 says, first of all, thank you for responding to my comment. I don't disagree that calling Batman into Catwoman a glass cannon is harsh. There's definitely other characters that fit that description better. My point was that her offensive output far outweighs her durability. Once you've tagged her in, you have to spam basic attacks with her until her cat rage runs out, and then you pretty much have to tag her right out so she doesn't die. Having Batman into teammates helps to avoid KOs, but she still comes back with 1 health, so you can just knock her out again. Glass cannon is probably the wrong term, but my point was that she can't take a hit like Flashpoint Batman can. Do we want to talk about that quickly first?
Yeah, I guess
really quick.
It's an interesting point only because I think this. So does she? Because to me, glass cannon is sort of a pejorative term, right? It's an insult of base. I mean, not that we're talking about people,
but we like some glass cannon.
Well, yeah, but it's the way the term is used.
Yeah,
it's meant as, well, this person or this character
really
isn't really that good. It's not just that they are
but
vulnerable.
I don't even think so, because glass cannons, I mean, if you're a glass cannon, part of it too is that you do have a lot of offensive potential. I think what it is to me, anyways, if you feel like it's pejorative, my sort of feeling of it is that it exists on a continuum, right, of describing people, right, where you can be really sort of hardy, like I like and then there's certain phrases that you can use to describe sort of each type of person. Like if you're really hardy and strong, it's not necessarily offensively weak, but where you're only really sort of talking about your defensive potential. And this isn't like a game term, but like built like a brick poop house, right? It's sort of like strong, big on your feet, right?
Right.
And then, glass cannon is that, like, you still have the cannon, so there is something that you're saying about sort of your offensive potential, and you're saying you're weak. And so part of it is that there's a subjective sort of threshold that each person has.
So here's the thing. I don't even think that I don't think she can't take it. I think she can take a hit as well as almost anybody else. When you look at her stats as a metal character, when she's fully promoted as much as a metal character can be, and she's properly eliteed and level high enough, her health is actually still pretty high. Mm-hmm. I think what we don't want to do is, it's not so much of a problem as it is less accurate characterization that just because she does a lot of damage doesn't mean that her health counts for less. She is so much better health-wise and durability-wise than Ares or Luchador Bane.
Yeah.
And I don't think that she does any worse than Flashpoint Batman as far as being able to survive. And when you've maxed out her passive at 21 seconds, I think that's a huge amount of time. You don't really need to tag her out that fast, because all you need to do is in that 21 seconds, it's not that hard to have built up 2 bars of power. Now you've recharged her, or even to knock somebody out. If you're taking 21 seconds to knock somebody out, or where you cannot knock somebody out and you don't generate 2 bars of power, I think there's a bit of a problem with your setup.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there we go. A little brief for that. And then the second point was, I initially liked NFTs for the reasons you mentioned. Making art valuable again, being able to own an original painting or a song sounds really cool, but it's obviously turned into a bunch of celebrities buying pictures of monkeys wearing sunglasses or whatever. I really hate the internet sometimes. And yeah, I totally with you. We won't talk for that much longer because we've, talked about NFTs, I think, at length already.
Yeah.
But, one of my earliest exposures to NFTs is this comic and content creator, this like sort of weird internet prose writer named Lord Birthday. And I really like his stuff. I think it's funny and interesting, and then every once in a while it's poignant. He's got this weird sort of like not bad, but like odd on purpose art style. that makes it stand out. It's that kind of stuff that looks like almost like on the edge of gross potentially, but sort of simple, stripped down. So he's got a really interesting, compelling art style, and the way I'm describing it might make it sound like I dislike it, but I think it's actually really compelling, and I think it's really appealing, and he's just accurately sort of doing what he wants to be
appealing in a non-standard kind of way. Yeah, right. Non-mainstream way.
Yeah,
right.
Appealing with the goal not necessarily being aesthetic attractiveness. Right. And he's got this sort of like eclectic style and this weird, funny way of writing. And so he did like an NFT for like one of his earlier pieces. And it strikes me when it's a way of supporting artists, when it's sort of another version of crowdsourcing, right? And when it gets framed to me as like, this is a way for artists to mobilize and use a much smaller number of individuals who really like their stuff as a viable way of supporting themselves as a business. I think that's really awesome. And that's really worth doing. And I think that, I don't think it did a lot that other stuff couldn't do. I think the main thing that it did was like allowing stuff to be traded as a security and letting people sort of feel like they're almost investing in the artist and buying into sort of the ecosystem, buying that what maybe feels like a potentially deeper connection. Like what like a top tier Patreon donation would be, except something that you only have to buy once and not as much on an ongoing basis. And then also for like that option to cash out later. And I think what I realized is that a lot of what I think made NFTs potentially, what felt like it made them potentially better for certain use cases than other options, is also kind of what makes it not work. And it also is what maybe corrupted it and made it lead to where it is. Because the idea that it can increase in value and that you can buy in just to invest, I feel like you've almost moved a little bit away from the inherent value of art and having that person produce stuff. And you've moved more towards trying to simultaneously support something, but then also like somehow like get yours out of it too. And win something back from it in a weird way. And that sort of nature of that. One-time support.
Would it be right to try to maybe rephrase that in a way saying that part of what's corrupted it is the selfishness of wanting to get yours too at the same time as the good part, which is supporting content creator.
Yeah, and so that's the sort of I realized, and the other thing about it is the way that like people can do like NFTs of their old stuff, right? And the way that there doesn't have to be anything where there can be as much or as little sort of tied into it as you want, and that sort of flexibility and like the whether you give rights or not, and then being able to sell as many copies of it, that's kind of cool because it lets somebody produce a digital good with relatively less effort. Which was one of the things that I initially thought was cool. It's like, oh, well, like if you have like a viral post, whatever, you can just like NFT that or like the most popular thing, right? It's in the same way that you could like make like merch of like, your most popular like joke or whatever. I think about Bug Hunter, because I think the way Bug Hunter has monetized, right? And
so just for people who haven't watched us a long time.
He's an artist who I really love, and he's also somebody who I now have the privilege of sometimes, like hopping into like a game session with.
He's a singer-songwriter.
He's a singer-songwriter, and he's incredibly talented. I will plug him every time I talk about him. Listen to Bug Hunter. He is really good. Dear McCracken is a favorite of mine, but a lot of his songs are good. He's a really strong lyricist. I like his singing style and the tone of his stuff. I can't recommend him enough. I think he's a really stand-up guy. Unless, there's a secret second half of him that I don't see at all. I've had the privilege of talking to him enough that I would be able to vouch for his character as well as his music. So but yeah. So the way that he as in the space that he is recently being a full-time musician. And huge congratulations to him for that too. But he's got this really nice balance of how he monetizes and connects to his audience, and how you can buy merch to support him, or buy a private Zoom show to support him, and or buy a ticket to what he's doing right now is song showcases, where every month it's a $5 ticket with an option to tip. And it's he plays through a bunch of his music. His upcoming one on the 20th is going to be like a full playthrough of one of his albums. It's an anniversary run through, and then at the end he's going to play one unreleased song that, might be
Right.
on the next album, or it might be a future track, or, might go
Something a little bit
back
more
into the bin.
exclusive. Something
Yeah,
just, yeah.
you're going to get to hear something that nobody else can hear, and you sort of get to be in an inner circle that way. And the way that he does stuff, where he's got little sort of things on an ongoing basis, where people who like him can support him, is really nice. And it feels very not mercenary. The way that he charges for stuff, and the way that he ekes out his living, as is well within his right. I don't want to make it sound like I don't think any artist shouldn't be on the hustle to sort of make money and be rewarded for doing what they love. But I think what's really cool about it is that there's a lot of people who I know interact with him, talk with him, are I think I can fairly say, like, friends of his that he's met through doing this, who continue to support him and buy his merch and whatever else, and fund this thing for him. And it doesn't feel super transactional. It doesn't feel like it's like he's really sort of hustling and forcing anybody to buy anything from him. And I think that NFTs seem cool as an idea, but they feel a lot more sort of business end. They feel a lot more like a way of getting at money, and I know there's better and worse ways of doing it, but they feel a lot more like a squeeze, Right.
So if I were to bring that back to Injustice, if it sounds the way you're describing it is the way I feel about the differences between the glitches where you're just doing something to get more stuff versus the kind of glitches that let you play more. Mm-hmm. To me, there's a substantive difference between them, because one takes you further away from the game, where you're just doing something mechanically over and over to try to cheat, versus the kind of cheats that just let you play more, and you're still earning the stuff. You just happen to be bypassing the time limits that are set on the game. So with that separation where it does, so there's clearly something that needs to be done, which is supporting the artist and generating income so that they can actually spend more time doing this cool thing without making it seem so I think you use the word mercenary. I was trying to think of another word where it's just
capitalistic, maybe.
Yeah, capitalist. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but when you say the words like hustle and stuff, it's neat that he's actually gotten to work full time, because I think one of the perspectives that we lose, I think, when we spend too much time consuming content and very little time looking at the side of creating it, is that most content creators can't make a great living. At best, they're going to, like say for authors, for example, the great majority of authors who are successful, who continue to write a significant, produce a significant amount of content, either have another job or don't really make a great living. Yeah. And the really sort of rich celebrity authors are very much the exception. Yeah. And same with music. So when the fact that Bug is able to do this full time is kind of pretty spectacular, actually. Yeah. I mean, you said it really fast, but to me, that's huge.
Yeah. So this is just one more plug for Bug Hunter. I want him to keep making music for a very long time. So you should absolutely support his stuff. Check him out, listen to him. And then if you ever show up to one of his shows or anything, let us know. There's a chance always that we'll be at, or me more likely than you. Yeah. But that if you roll up to a show, that one of us will be there. Yeah. And hang out.
And I think it's hard too when an artist spends so much time creating art. Yeah. There's this really pernicious myth that somehow it's only the artist that suffers for their craft or that are starving artists are the only ones that have any integrity. Yeah. Because that's a load of BS. I think the fact is we don't have a great system. Capitalism is not a great system for encouraging art. Yeah. And so sure, some will get popular, but even a lot of people that are making stuff that's meaningful, that might be really important to a smaller group of people, they should still get a chance to make art.
It's true. And, art should be for everyone. That's the weird thing about art, is that art is a great way of processing challenging experience, right? Yeah. And so I think art is probably most powerful when you can address somebody who maybe has could benefit with help working through an emotion, or being put into a certain place, or being given some sort of insight or understanding into themselves, or, you know, whatever else. And so I think there's a huge value for art as like a service being targeted at people who maybe don't have access to the same financial resources as other people. I think, you know, there's tends to be a lot less, there's a lot more songs about, you know, working class Joes or people down on their luck than there is about billionaires and yachts, right? But the best sort of people to target to get support for your art to continue making it, I think, are people who have more access to resources. So there's this weird sort of balance. And yeah, and, you know, if you're an artist, you probably want to focus on the art itself, right? But if you're independent, you have to also run a business. And even if you're not independent, then you have other people who are running a business around you who need you to allow them to keep working. Right? And so there's this weird sort of push and pull, and that's, I think, a really strong argument for something like universal basic income and like removing some of that pressure. And so because however you feel about any individual artist, I think everybody has at least one musician or author or somebody who's creating something, but it's not like a producer of necessarily like a good, right? Who you go, that person is brilliant and the world is better for them to be putting their energy into doing this with their lives. And I want, you know, for all the people that are able to do that, it would be cool if they were able to just focus on that.
Yeah, you know, you say that and it makes me think of a couple of writers like Barry Huart. Do you remember Bridge of Birds?
No. Bridge of Birds?
Bridge of Birds.
Okay.
It was Master Lee and Number 10 Ox.
Oh, yeah, I do.
And he did a whole series of books. Originally, his intention was to do like a series of, 10 different books or something. And he stopped after 3.
Yeah.
Because his publisher sort of screwed him over in complicated kind of ways where there was still demand for his books, but not in a way that could be measured or recognized by his publisher. So they decided to drop him after the first 3 books, and he just never did it. And what that cost us was potentially some really cool stories. And I think I can't overstate this enough about the amount of art that we've lost because people couldn't make a living at it. People were subject to racism, to misogyny. Like the barriers to art don't have to be so big to discourage it from happening. Because it's already hard enough. And so the more barriers we can take away from it, I think the richer. I don't want to say life experiences because that's not what I'm talking about. The richer, I think, the community and the art that we have access to can be. Yeah,
for sure. And I think there's one notable example that I can think of where capitalism has created more good art and only one. And I don't think it's necessarily a good argument for it, but it's Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes. Because he really wanted to stop and he hated Sherlock Holmes. And he went back to it because he ran out of money. He killed off Sherlock Holmes and then had to go back to it. And I wouldn't argue for that. I'm just thinking it's funny because I was thinking about, are there any like opposite examples? And that's the only one that comes to my mind at all. And I think you would say that's probably a bad thing. If somebody could write really strong, compelling fiction and was happy to leave it off and then to be forced to come back to it and sort of keep churning it out, I think that's also probably not a great...
Yeah, do we know what we would have lost? Like, if he'd had the option to just do what he wanted, what would we have gotten from him?
I don't know.
If he was happy.
Yeah. If he was better off. Because he has that quote, right, where he was like, if I'm only remembered for, like, Sherlock Holmes, I'll, like, consider, like, my life's work a failure or something like that.
Yeah.
Did not love that character.
Yeah. It does come at a cost, right? Because I think there's another myth is that people who are really miserable really write great stuff. And it's sort of true that really being miserable inspires it. But to actually get down to write it and produce it, I think it's pretty consistently that I've heard from artists that they're actually better at doing it when they're in a better headspace.
Yeah, I don't know where it would have been. It might have been in the podcast I only listen to the Mountain Goats, but John Darnielle has some really good stuff about that. Lead singer of the Mountain Goats.
Right. Does he disagree?
Songwriter. No, he agrees. He fully agrees. That about like it can be problematic to romanticize suffering for the purposes of art. Because he's had somebody who is able to really accurately tap into a lot of hard topics because of personal lived experiences that he's had in the past, but it's not his suffering that creates the good art, right?
Right.
And that it's a balance that, like, you know, perspective can be valuable.
Absolutely,
and it's easier. I think that's the thing, is that there's certain types of art that, in my opinion, you can't do properly without lived experience.
Right.
Right?
Right.
But that it's different from lived experience as a prerequisite for being able to sort of really understand a thing, and then needing to be miserable to be creating a thing.
Right. Right.
And that's sort of like self-punishing in order to produce art. I think that can be pretty problematic.
And we haven't even finished with Cameron's question.
Yeah, so maybe this is a single question special, potentially. Because this last one...
I think the meaty part is actually the last part, which is why I pulled this up out of order.
Yeah.
Because it's a more recent question.
So, 3, I know you guys talk about politics and current events every now and then, so I'm curious what you guys think of the Russia/Ukraine situation. It's starting to get a little scary now. Both of them have nuclear weapons, and a lot of other major countries are getting involved. Over here in the UK, the government is shutting down Russian banks, businesses, etc., and sanctioning a bunch of oligarchs. They've also said they'll be arming certain regions in Ukraine so that they can defend themselves. And then he says, great content, as always, my favorite crypto podcast, which is very funny. And then edit to add, quick correction, apparently Ukraine gave their nuclear weapons to Russia for safekeeping before all this, so they likely won't have access to them. So...
I actually don't know enough about that to know where they ended up. I do know that Ukraine had to give up their nuclear capabilities as part of a peace treaty they signed with Russia, so that previously they would not be able, or they would not, so that they would not face an attack from Russia.
Yeah.
So sort of to diffuse the situation.
Yeah. So this is a really hard situation, and this is one of those times where I feel like we can talk a little bit about it. Obviously, you know, our heart goes out to Ukraine and everything that's happening right now, right? And it's a worrying time. I think it can be really scary. I don't have, I feel like, enough of a handle on the specifics to be able to really speak to a lot of those. But I feel really bad for civilians. I feel really bad for the people on the ground everywhere, because there's clearly a lot of people, you know, protesting against this within Russia. There's a lot of Russian citizens who want no part of this. There's a lot of, you know, Ukrainian citizens. There's a lot of people everywhere who are going to be going through a lot of real sort of unnecessary hardship right now.
And
suffering. Suffering. And I just think it's, you know, obviously it shouldn't be a controversial thing. I think murder is bad. I think suffering isn't not so good.
I think you make a great point, actually, that there are going to be better experts than us who have points of views about things.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still relatively simplistic but true to say, hey, war is bad.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of times there's enough, not in this case, but in other times there's been enough misinformation to sort of blur the line between who's good and who's bad.
Yeah.
I don't think that's true here. But despite all that, there's a couple points I feel like don't get talked about enough. One is that there's still a huge amount of racism, whether we're talking about the kind of coverage or just the people that are experiencing the most trouble. Because what I'm seeing now from a very small number of journalists is that there is racism still involved.
Yeah.
The obvious stuff that we should be aware of is how we talk about refugees, people who are displaced.
Yeah.
And how a lot of in media at least, a lot of the talking heads mention, oh, these are refugees. They look just like you and me. They're Christian. They're whatever. And that is it's not bad to identify with them, but you need to save some of your empathy for people who don't look like you, who are in that same situation. Like, so brown people of color, black people, any marginalized people, they deserve as much sympathy, and they also are refugees. They're not migrants. They're not, what are the other terms that they use? I can't remember.
Aliens, illegals?
Well, yeah. They're all refugees too. So I'm not saying that the people from the Ukraine should be treated worse in the media. I'm saying everybody should be respected the same way.
Yeah, everybody should be brought up to whatever the sort of the best treated group is right now, and maybe even better.
And so the reports I'm also seeing is that sometimes there are individuals who are trying to leave Ukraine, and because they don't look white,
yeah,
they are being turned away. at the border to Poland,
Terrible.
for example. And so the other thing that I feel like is not being spoken about enough is the sanctions. So here's the thing. So I don't think the sanctions are necessarily a bad thing, but I'm more torn than I usually am in these situations, because the purpose of sanctions, I feel, is to try to change somebody's mind.
Yeah, it's to put pressure on somebody.
Right. And the pressure ends up being indirect sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to put pressure on Russia, the direct pressure is you limit the people in the positions of power who are making decisions.
Yeah.
And you put the screws to them effectively. You put pressure on them by making them suffer in a way that they will recognize.
Yeah.
And that would be taking away their money.
Yeah.
The problem with the stuff that's happening now with the sanctions and removing Russia from the SWIFT, I guess, system, so you take away their ability to move money around.
Yeah.
The Russian bank, in response to that, has increased the interest rates.
Yeah.
You're seeing a huge amount of inflation. You're seeing a devaluation of the ruble.
Yeah.
And it's making the people of Russia suffer. And the problem I have with that is you've already got people in Russia who are protesting. Mm-hmm. They're being arrested in the thousands. And so they already know that this is a bad thing that's happening. They already are holding the oligarchs, specifically Putin, I guess, responsible for it. So it feels worse than usual to have these sanctions against a country that's clearly...
There's so much friendly fire. There's so much, shrapnel. There's so much that's hitting people who really don't deserve it.
Right.
Yeah, and that's like one of those things. It reminds me of, I know it's not the same thing, but it reminds me of the response to terrorism in the United States, where you've got these people who are very sort of national, like ultra-nationalistic, or really sort of strongly aligned with a culture, and who have this narrative in their head of it's us against the world, right? And so we're sort of fighting to have our place in it. There's fighting, and so that's, like part of what the narrative is like, oh, well, we're trying to expand, we're, trying to build Russia up, right? Make ourselves strong, right? And we have to fight to take it. And to keep it.
And right? They have to be victims in order to maintain that kind of
part of it. And again, this is not me saying it's good or bad. I'm acknowledging that I don't have the information. I'm acknowledging that it's more complicated than I'm going to be able to hold in my head. But part of it is that you are sort of triggering this nationalistic response where out of the people who go, Russia needs to be strong, we need to fight, it's us against everybody. Yeah. And then when they do something and then everybody turns against them, that's the kind of thing that makes those people dig in their heels.
Right. It radicalizes people.
And it's the same thing, which my connection to terrorism, right? Which is that the way that like the U.S. has historically responded to terrorism is by being super, super unacceptably racist to, thousands or hundreds of thousands of people who were in no way aligned at all with the terrorists or their goals or their belief system, and just based off of the color of their skin, and how that ultimately really strongly reinforced the terrorist message of these people don't care about you at all. These people hate us, and they don't want us, and they're, killing us, erasing us from history, whatever else, right? And then the U.S.'s response to the sort of terror attack is, we're going to act exactly like these people are claiming that we are. We're going to, be the monster that they think we are to all of these sort of unrelated people. And so it's tough too, right? Because when you put these people on the defensive too, right? Especially when what's happening here is at least in part a show of strength, right?
Right.
I'm here from a harm reduction perspective, right? Mm-hmm. I just don't want people to be put in harm's way unnecessarily. And I'm going to say this so many times just because I don't want anybody to come away from this thinking that I have like a really strong opinion about exactly what needs to be done. And I go, oh, well, it's easy. You just need to do this. I have no clue what that looks like.
Right.
But I feel really awful about all the harm that I know this is going to cause, whether or not it is the best thing in the long run. Because it's possible that it is. It just feels really bad. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of good decisions here. It doesn't feel like there's a lot of good options for anybody here.
Because, like you said, friendly fire. There's going to be collateral damage. It's nice to minimize it. And I feel like in this case, we know ahead of going into it, ahead of time, that there's going to be a bunch more that's unnecessary because the Russian people are already protesting at great cost to themselves.
Yeah.
They're being arrested in the thousands for protesting their own government doing these things to a neighbor.
Yeah.
So
and these are the same people who are going to have limited access to food and resources and everything else now because of the world stage.
Right. So it's, I guess, I totally agree with you too, that I don't know that I have an answer for what needs to happen. It just feels like these sanctions that are meant to put pressure to Putin are just too broad right now because they're putting pressure on people who are already on the same side. And when I say the same side, I mean our side of not wanting war, of not wanting Ukraine to be subjugated under Russian rule.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sucks. Yeah, and it's a lack of stability too. I mean, I'm sure that being under Putin's government, and again, I don't have all the information here, but I'm assuming that it's being under Putin's government is not preferable compared to being under the Ukrainian government. Everything that I've seen so far has led me to believe, and I think this is not a super extreme stance to take, that it's probably as a citizen, you're better off being a Ukrainian citizen right now than a Russian. You're already part of Ukraine, like not getting sort of turned into one, right? Aside from any nationalistic pride, if you're culturally Russian, if you want to be a Russian person, right? Just from existing in a political system, it seems like.
I guess it's, I mean, I'm learning about it as I go, but I've been seeing stories about how there's just, ethnically, there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of overlap.
So which is part of the reason why we're seeing some things play out the way they do, because really it feels more like a civil war in some ways in the coverage that I'm reading than it is a regular sort of, war between countries.
Yeah. So, but it's just a turmoil too. Like, even if you were transitioning to whichever government you'd want to be in, if people are fighting over your sort of land and your personhood, where you're going to be a citizen of, right? Yeah. That transition back and forth is violent and hard no matter what, even if you're not involved in the fighting. Yeah. That turmoil is really tough. And the thing that this reminds me a little bit of actually is the way that they built the barriers, the way that they have what's the term? Borders. The way that borders were divided in parts of, for example, southern Texas, between Texas and Mexico, where there are, towns that have been there just for like hundreds or thousands or however long, have been there for long before the U.S. and Mexico were entities that were worth talking about as like distinct things, and the way that the borders were drawn. And then people's, neighbors, a town like a mile south of them were like Mexicans, and then the people, north of the border were Americans, just fully arbitrarily. And the way that the people there who are on other sides of the border, who are, a couple, like a mile or something from each other, have so much more in common with the people around them than they do with probably even people in like northern Texas. Right? Like not even outside of the state. Texas is big enough that, there's a lot of space for there to be sort of cultural shift, even just within that same state. And it's really rough when there are these people who are, who have coexisted and lived alongside each other for so long, who there's so much overlap between, right? Who are...
there's a separation imposed on them that's unnatural.
Yeah, who are entirely arbitrarily separated, and then to have all this fighting over sort of the line and whose marbles, right? Like
relatively arbitrary kind of divisions.
For who gets how, and it just I don't know. It's just it's really hard.
Okay. So before we drop this, I do want to say one other thing about one person in particular that I think has been a bit of a dink about this. Yeah, is Alex Ovechkin. So people who don't follow NHL may not realize he's plays for Washington Capitals. Yeah, he's chasing Wayne Gretzky's lifetime goal scoring record, and he's probably got a reasonable chance at breaking a record that was thought to be completely untouchable. Total dink. Yeah. So the what's happening now is that when people are asking him, because he's Russian, when people are asking him, so how do you feel about what Putin is doing, what's happening with Russia, he's just wishy-washy. He's just really saying, well, I'm just an athlete. The problem is that he spent years really promoting Putin, supporting him on his election campaign. I don't know.
Yeah.
But just really doing a lot of things that are overtly political. And then when it's not convenient to do so, he just backs off and says, "Oh, I'm just an athlete."
Yeah, when there's a clear side, it's like no comment.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, because I don't think I have, in Canada at least, I haven't seen anybody. I've talked to some people who are Russian, and nobody supports what's happening here.
Right. Right.
Like, it's hard, yeah, it's hard because it doesn't feel like there's anything that it's for, and not that war is right when it's in service of something. There's very few times where I think that kind of mass conflict, and maybe none are springing to mind. Slavery, that's true. Yeah. But that kind of like real sort of mass conflict is really hard to justify in the best of times. You're right. There's definitely some. Slavery is a good example. It's hard.
I was just thinking Civil War, right?
Yeah.
Like I was just making a connection with the United States.
But I don't even really, and maybe this is my ignorance, and maybe I need to look into it more. But like I don't even see what the argument is. I don't even see we're doing this because why. It makes so little sense to me. And I know even when there is an argument or a reason, a lot of the times, you break it down, the argument is not nearly as good as it should be. It's like, resources, oil, power, control, and those are obviously not sort of worthwhile. But yeah, no.
Well, on a person in a personal level, it doesn't make sense. But I think from the point of view of somebody who's got some power, who's controlling the resources of a lot of other people of a country, then some of those motivations make sense. And the problem is the kind of people that end up seeking control or seeking power and getting
want
power
want
more of it. And so the whole process has selected out for relatively pathological personalities to make those kind of decisions and then have the power to implement those decisions. I think that's the problem. Oh, and actually I should, for all the sort of teeth gnashing and feeling like you can't do anything, the one thing that I do feel like is useful, I've personally made a donation to the Red Cross.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that if there's somebody who is likely to be able to alleviate some of that suffering and do it in a way without stealing our money, I think it's the Red Cross. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm sure there's other organizations, but what I'm always afraid of is that somebody might be taking advantage of the situation and using it as an opportunity to take money from people without actually helping.
And then don't use us as a primary source of information. If you're looking to donate, maybe do your own research into somebody who you can feel comfortable with, just in case. Okay,
so maybe I shouldn't, but when you say do your own research, it feels that phrase has been co-opted recently.
Yeah.
In the service of science deniers.
Oh yeah.
And it's not, you're not wrong. It is totally right. It's just, it feels like, I gotta find another way to say it.
Yeah, don't let our judgment sort of replace your own.
Yeah.
For any of this.
Use your best judgment, yeah. You might have more information than we do.
So yeah, that's I think how we feel about it right now.
Help the refugees, really.
There's not a lot of what we're saying that I think is particularly controversial, and I feel like sometimes we have an opinion where I don't feel like a lot of people are talking about it, and you've had some of that, here, but I feel like there's very little that I have to say that I don't see everybody saying. I don't have something sort of extra to say on top of other stuff. It's a tough situation.
Yeah.
It's really unfortunate all around. But anyways, I think that might be our end this week.
Yeah, so you're right. It was a one comment or one question video,
but there was some good stuff there, and
we appreciate the questions. We still are holding on to a list of all the other questions that we haven't gotten to that we're interested in responding to, so please keep on asking.
So for sure. And here at the end we have our sort of acknowledgements, our thank you section. So I'd like to give a shout out to Eliza the Menace Caton. She came to her lab unprepared and poured her sample down the sink by accident. Now her hot TA hates her. That was written by her, so all of these things were, to different extents, exagerations.
I thought you were going to say that they were all true. I thought you said
all very true. Yeah. Well, no, I just want to make it clear that I'm not saying that her TA is hot. I haven't seen this person.
You don't know that the TA hates her, that the TA is hot, or that the alleged stuff actually went down the sink.
Yeah, that she allegedly poured her allegedly unprepared sample down the sink, and her allegedly hot TA allegedly hates her.
Right.
Yeah, so this is all slander. Or, that's not the
libel?
Term. Libel.
Which one's which?
Slander is, I think you have to say negative things that can, like,
damage one is said reputation. And one is written.
Okay, well then maybe it's not slander or libel. What am I looking for? I don't know what term I'm looking for then.
We'll figure it out. Or maybe you'll let us know in the comments. I know we have a lot of smart people listening to us.
That's true.
They just don't like to talk.
That's a weird... That almost feels like you're insulting the people who do comment.
Oh, I'm sorry, but I did. That was not my intention.
It's like we have a lot of smart people who listen to us, and none of them ever comment.
So just a lot of the people. There's a lot of smart people who don't like to talk. Not that the only people who talk are not smart. That's not what I mean.
I don't even know. There's too much going on in that sentence for me to even say. I don't endorse that sentence necessarily.
Okay. Neither do I. I don't know who is in the room with us. I withdraw that.
Yeah. Okay.
Withdrawn.
Okay. And we'd also like to thank a group of people who I will say unreservedly are all very smart people because they've made the decision to support us directly financially.
Not only are they very smart, but they are very kind.
And I will say that each one of these people is definitely hot too.
Hot.
That's a claim that I'll make for sure.
Very true.
And so that's all the lovely folks who support us on Patreon. So that is BomboBen, Console Peasant, and Edwoon at the highest tier Last Word, Sinemac and Mohammed Albshaiti at the Your Message Here tier, Shawn, Farrell, Daniel Simonson, Aaron Maule, Michael DeVries, Brandon C., Irvin Ruiz, and Eddydoo, who support us on the credited level, and Chris Wolf, Scarlet Danny, Awesome Gamer 241, Pavu RS, Gavin Malott, and Isfar E. at the gratitude level. Thanks so much for your support, and we'll see you next time.
Komoda.